Major Elena Vasquez had never imagined that her final stand would take place 52 light-years from Earth, on a frozen moon orbiting a gas giant that humans hadn't even named yet. The hastily established outpost, little more than prefab shelters and defense turrets, was the last human stronghold in the Epsilon Eridani system. She exhaled, watching her breath crystallize in the sub-zero temperature of the command center. The environmental systems were failing, diverting power to the remaining defense grid. Through the viewport, she could see the massive Hegemony mothership hovering in orbit, its obsidian hull absorbing rather than reflecting light, a black hole against the stars. "Status report," she ordered, her voice steady despite the knowledge that their position was functionally hopeless. Lieutenant Kai Rhodes, the only other surviving officer, looked up from his console, his dark eyes hollow from 3 days without sleep. "Not good, Major. Ammunition reserves at 12%. Environmental systems critical. Communications array damaged beyond repair. The remaining fleet elements have either been destroyed or forced to retreat. And the Hegemony forces? Still landing. Orbital scans suggest at least 3 more battalions inbound." Kai's voice lowered. "They're taking their time. They know we can't escape." Elena nodded, unsurprised. The Xil'Nari Hegemony had been methodically eradicating human outposts for the past 18 months. Ever since humanity refused to accept their terms of protected species status, a thinly veiled form of indentured servitude. The Hegemony, a coalition of 7 technologically advanced species, controlled most of the known galaxy and had been doing so for over 2,000 years. Humans, with their mere 2 centuries of interstellar travel, were seen as upstarts. Dangerous upstarts. "They've sent a communication request," said communications specialist Maya Okafor, the youngest member of the team at just 23. "Priority channel." Elena straightened her uniform jacket, a pointless gesture of formality that nonetheless helped center her thoughts. "Put it through." The central holographic display flickered and revealed the imposing form of Archon Vex Cal, supreme military commander of the Hegemony forces. The Archon belonged to the Xil'Nari species, 3 meters tall with iridescent exoskeletal plates and 4 articulated arms. Their species had evolved in high-gravity environments, giving them tremendous physical strength along with a natural armor that could withstand small arms fire. "Major Vasquez," the Archon's voice was modulated through a translator, but the smugness transcended language barriers. "I am impressed by your species' tenacity, if not your wisdom. Your position is untenable. You have no reinforcements, no escape, and limited supplies." Elena kept her expression neutral. "If our position is so hopeless, Archon, why are we having this conversation?" The Archon's head tilted in what Elena had learned was their equivalent of amusement. Scientific curiosity, perhaps. "Your species continues to resist despite overwhelming evidence that you cannot prevail. It defies logical analysis. We're funny that way. I am offering terms. Surrender now and your remaining personnel will be integrated into the Hegemony as provisional citizens rather than labor resources. It is a generous offer, given your continued defiance." Elena knew what integration meant. Mind wipes, behavioral modification, assigned roles based on physical capabilities. Humans reduced to tools. "I'll need to discuss with my officers," she said, stalling for time. "You have 1 local hour," the Archon replied, before terminating the connection. As soon as the hologram vanished, Kai leaned forward. "They're afraid of something. The Xil'Nari don't negotiate when they have the upper hand." Elena nodded. "My thoughts exactly. Maya, what's the status of the quantum entanglement communicator?" Maya hesitated. "Still operational, but we're saving it for emergency protocols, right? Once we use it, they'll detect the energy signature. This qualifies as an emergency. Send a message to Admiral Jackson. Authentication code Epsilon 91. Tell him, cornered, but they're nervous. Request immediate implementation of Thanatos protocol." Kai's eyes widened. "Thanatos? But that's..." "A last resort," Elena finished for him. "And we're well past that point. The unexpected variable. The Hegemony War Council convened in the Strategic Command Center of the mothership. Archon Vex-Cal stood at the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by holographic projections of the 6 other council members representing the coalition species. The human outpost will fall within the next rotation, Vex-Cal reported. They are isolated, outgunned, and trapped. However, I recommend caution. Strategic Commander Mal Tak of the Peldon avian strategists with mental computation abilities that outperformed most AI systems fluttered his wing membranes in irritation. These delays are unnecessary, Archon. Your forces outnumber them 50-1. The additional battalions you've requested represent an inefficient allocation of resources. I agree with the strategic commander, said Overseer Lith Ven of the Serpentine CIA Cath. Our intelligence indicates the humans have no significant technology or weapons we haven't already countered. They are primitive compared to even our youngest hegemony species. Vex-Cal activated a holographic display showing the defensive patterns of the human outpost. Their tactics are unconventional. They've held this position far longer than our models predicted, with fewer resources and personnel. It suggests variables we haven't accounted for. Science Director Xil'Nari of the Crystalline Voth interjected, her voice resonating like wind chimes. I've been analyzing human combat data since first contact. They consistently outperform statistical models. They improvise in ways our strategic algorithms struggle to predict. All species improvise under pressure, Mal Tak dismissed. It is a primitive survival mechanism. Not like this, Xil'Nari countered. Most species follow discernible patterns even when improvising. Humans create entirely new approaches with no precedent. They seem to thrive in chaos rather than being diminished by it. Vex-Cal nodded. Furthermore, we've detected unusual communications patterns. They're clearly coordinating something, but the content is encrypted beyond our current decryption capabilities. Impossible, said Lith Ven. Their cryptographic technology is at least 3 generations behind ours. Nevertheless, Vex-Cal replied, we cannot decode it. And I remind the Council that this is the 7th human outpost that has maintained resistance far beyond projected collapse timelines. Something is not adding up. The holographic representation of Grand Arbiter Zhu Lan, eldest of the founding Xil'Nari and head of the Hegemony Council, leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Archon? That we may have miscalculated the humans. Not in their technology or numbers, but in something more fundamental. Their psychological makeup, perhaps. They rejected protected status, the first species to do so in 800 cycles. Because they are irrational, Mal Tak interjected. Their refusal of our protection was emotional, not logical. Or, Vex-Cal said carefully, because they perceive something about our offer that others did not. A heavy silence fell over the council. You've been spending too much time studying them, Archon Grand Arbiter Zhu Lan finally said. This borders on respect for a primitive species. Understanding is not respect, Vex-Cal countered. But dismissing an enemy, no matter how apparently inferior, is the first step toward defeat. Enough philosophy, Lith Ven hissed. Crush this outpost and be done with it. The humans have no path to victory. Their defiance is merely the final spasm of a dying civilization. Grand Arbiter Zhu Lan raised a hand for silence. Proceed with your plan, Archon. But be warned the Council expects results, not further delays. The human problem must be resolved before we begin the next expansion phase. After the Council adjourned, Science Director Xil'Nari remained, her crystalline form refracting light across the chamber. You didn't share your full concerns with the Council, she observed. Vex-Cal turned to the holographic display showing the human outpost. They wouldn't understand. They haven't faced the humans directly. And what have you observed that troubles you so deeply? The Archon hesitated. They don't fight like a species trying to win. They fight like a species buying time. The human element. In the cramped laboratory section of the outpost, Dr. Marcus Harrington hunched over a modified communications array, fingers flying across holographic interfaces as he implemented the final adjustments to what the team had unofficially dubbed the Hail Mary. "You're certain this will work?" Elena asked, watching from the doorway. Marcus didn't look up. "Certain? No. But the theoretical models check out." The Thanatos Protocol was designed for exactly this scenario. Marcus had been one of Earth's leading quantum physicists before the war. When the Hegemony began their systematic attack on human colonies, he'd volunteered for frontline service, bringing his expertise where it was most needed. His official title was scientific advisor, but everyone knew his real value lay in understanding alien technology and finding its weaknesses. "Explain it to me again," Elena said. "The simplified version." Marcus finally looked up, pushing his glasses back into place. Despite the military-style haircut he'd adopted, he still maintained the distracted air of an academic. The Hegemony uses quantum-locked communication systems. Unhackable, instantaneous across any distance, it's how they coordinate their empire across thousands of light years. He gestured to the modified equipment. But every system has a flaw. Theirs is that all their quantum networks are synchronized to the same baseline frequency. It provides tremendous advantages in terms of coordination and information sharing. And also a single point of failure, Elena finished. Exactly. The Thanatos Protocol is essentially a quantum virus. Once introduced into their network, it propagates through their entire communication infrastructure simultaneously. No time delay, no warning. Every Hegemony ship, station, and facility connected to the network will experience the same disruption at the exact same moment. "And you can deploy it from here?" Marcus grimaced. "That's the tricky part. We need direct access to their quantum network, which means getting aboard their mothership," Elena said. "Not just aboard, we need to reach their primary communication node. I'd need at least 3 minutes of uninterrupted access." Elena absorbed this information silently, the impossible odds settling heavily on her shoulders. "How many people would you need?" "Ideally, a full strike team. Realistically, just me and maybe one guard. The smaller the team, the better our chances of moving undetected." A notification chimed on Elena's comm unit. "The Archon is calling again, probably to demand our answer." Marcus nodded grimly. "What will you tell him?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I'll tell him I need to meet in person to discuss surrender terms. He'll suspect a trap. Of course he will. But his curiosity about humans might outweigh his caution. He wants to understand why we keep fighting." A cold smile touched her lips. "Let's show him." The Hegemony shuttle dwarfed the small human craft as both vessels docked in the mothership's hangar bay. Elena had insisted on bringing her own transport, citing diplomatic protocol. Surprisingly, the Archon had agreed. Their small team, Elena, Marcus, and Kai, were escorted by a squadron of Xil'Nari guards through the cavernous interior of the mothership. The ship's design emphasized the Hegemony's technological superiority, vast open spaces, gravity manipulation that made the massive vessel feel as stable as planetary ground, and living metal surfaces that shifted and reconfigured as needed. "Impressive, isn't it?" Archon Vexcal said, joining them midway through their journey to the command center. "This vessel is over 900 of your Earth years old, yet still more advanced than anything your species has achieved." "It's certainly large," Elena replied neutrally. "Do you often bring potential enemies directly to your command center?" "Enemies?" The Archon's head tilted. "You misunderstand your position, Major. You are no more enemies than a Yanvor cub is an enemy to a hunter. The outcome is predetermined by nature." Marcus, walking slightly behind Elena, was surreptitiously scanning their surroundings with a device disguised as a standard-issue medical monitor. Each intersection they passed, each security checkpoint, was being mapped and analyzed. "If we're so insignificant," Elena continued, keeping the Archon's attention, "why commit such resources to our subjugation? 7 prime battle groups for a single primitive species seems excessive." The Archon's upper arms performed a fluid gesture that the translation algorithms couldn't interpret. Your question reveals your limited understanding of galactic stability. The hegemony has maintained order for millennia by establishing clear hierarchies. Species that cannot accept their place disrupt this order. So we're being punished for having self-respect. You're being corrected for having delusions. Your species emerged from your atmosphere mere moments ago in cosmic terms. Yet you claim equal standing with civilizations that were crossing galaxies when your ancestors were still discovering fire. They arrived at a massive door that spiraled open at the Archon's approach, revealing the command center a vast spherical chamber with dozens of hegemony officers manning stations organized in concentric rings around a central holographic projection of the star system. Your surrender will be formally recorded here, the Archon announced. A historic moment for your species, the beginning of your proper integration into galactic society. Elena took a deep breath, eyes briefly meeting Kai's. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. Before we proceed, she said, I'd like my science officer to confirm the terms of surrender with your legal protocols. We want to ensure we fully understand what we're agreeing to. A reasonable request, the Archon conceded, gesturing to a data terminal. Your officer may access the public codices here. As Marcus moved toward the terminal, Kai suddenly stumbled, clutching his side as if in pain. My apologies, he gasped, dropping to one knee. Old injury, the atmospheric pressure change. The distraction worked. As guards moved toward Kai, Marcus slipped a small device into the data port, his movements obscured by his body. To any observer, he appeared to be simply interfacing with the terminal. Elena stepped forward. My officer needs medical attention. Our medical facilities are not calibrated for human physiology, the Archon stated. He will have to endure. Then perhaps we should expedite this process, Elena suggested. I'm prepared to formalize our surrender now. The Archon studied her for a moment, compound eyes unreadable. You've changed your approach, Major. Earlier you were resistant, now you're compliant. Why? Seeing the reality of your forces firsthand, Elena replied smoothly. There's no wisdom in continuing a hopeless fight. Behind them, Marcus was silently counting down. The infiltration program needed 90 more seconds to locate the quantum communication node and establish a secure connection for the Thanatos protocol. A reasonable assessment, the Archon said, though it contradicts everything we've observed about human behavior thus far. A warning alert suddenly flashed across the command center displays. One of the hegemony officers called out in their native language, too quick for the translators to catch. The Archon's posture changed instantly, all four arms extending in a combat-ready stance. The terminal is accessing restricted systems. Secure the humans. Everything happened at once. Guards converged on Marcus, who abandoned stealth and slammed a final command into the terminal. Kai sprang up, no longer feigning injury, and moved to intercept the closest guards, buying precious seconds. Protocol initiating. Marcus shouted. Elena drew a concealed weapon, not a standard firearm, but a device of Marcus's design that emitted a focused electromagnetic pulse. She fired it at the nearest control station, causing cascading failures across the command center systems. Stop them. The Archon roared as the lights flickered. They're sabotaging the quantum network. Marcus was tackled to the ground by two guards, but he was laughing. Too late. Transmission complete. The Archon loomed over Elena, who had been restrained by three guards. What have you done? Elena looked up at him, defiance blazing in her eyes. You forgot rule number 1 when dealing with cornered humans, Archon. And what rule is that? He demanded. We're at our most dangerous when we have nothing left to lose. The command center plunged into darkness as the primary systems failed. When the emergency power activated seconds later, the holographic displays showed something no one in the hegemony had ever witnessed. Every status indicator for their fleet had turned red simultaneously. Across hegemony space, in a coordinated instant that defied the normal laws of causality, every quantum-connected system experienced the same phenomenon. Ship engines shut down mid-flight. Defense grids collapsed. Communication networks dissolved into unintelligible noise. Command protocols rewrote themselves with contradictory instructions. An empire spanning thousands of light years was suddenly blinded, fragmented, and thrown into chaos. On the mothership, Archon Vex Cal watched in growing horror as reports flooded in from the few backup communication systems still functioning. "This is impossible," Science Director Xil'Nari whispered, her crystalline form vibrating with distress. "The quantum network is unhackable by definition." Apparently, Elena said from where she was still restrained, humans didn't get that memo. The Archon rounded on her. "What have you done?" "Tell me." Marcus, bleeding from a cut above his eye but still conscious, answered instead. "We introduced a paradox into your quantum infrastructure. A self-referential logic loop that essentially asks your system to both exist and not exist simultaneously. That would destroy any system attempting to process it," Xil'Nari said. "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "Your entire network is trying to solve an unsolvable problem. And because your quantum communication is instantaneous across any distance, the effect propagates everywhere at once," the Science Director finished, a new respect evident in her tone. The Archon's composure finally broke. "You've crippled an empire of 10,000 worlds for a temporary tactical advantage? The damage will be repaired. The network will be restored. And then your species will face consequences beyond your comprehension." Elena actually smiled. "You still don't understand. This wasn't a tactic, it was a demonstration." "Of what?" "That no matter how advanced you think you are, you're not infallible. That humans can find weaknesses you didn't even know existed. That we won't be cataloged, categorized, and controlled." A new alert sounded, and one of the hegemony officers called out in alarm. "Archon." Multiple new signatures appearing at the system's edge. They're human vessels, hundreds of them." "Impossible," the Archon hissed. "We destroyed the human fleet." "You destroyed the fleet we let you see," Elena corrected him. "Humanity's been building ships and hiding them across dozens of supposedly uninhabited systems since you first arrived. We knew we couldn't match your technology or numbers directly." The tactical display showed the approaching human armada not as advanced as hegemony vessels, but numerous and fully operational, while the hegemony forces drifted powerless or struggled with malfunctioning systems. "This is Admiral Helena Jackson of the United Earth Forces," came a transmission over the emergency channels. "To all hegemony vessels, your systems will remain compromised until you acknowledge the following terms. 1. All hegemony forces will withdraw from human settled systems immediately. 2. Humanity will be recognized as a sovereign entity, not subject to hegemony authority. 3. A neutral zone will be established between human and hegemony space, with terms to be negotiated by representatives with equal standing." The Archon stared at the tactical display in disbelief. "You planned this from the beginning. The outposts, the retreats, the apparent desperation, it was all a deception to make us commit our forces." "Not entirely," Elena admitted. "We lost good people in those battles. Real outposts. But we needed you to believe you had us cornered. We needed your overconfidence." "The other council species will never agree to these terms," the Archon warned. "You've made an enemy of the oldest, most powerful coalition in known space." Marcus, who had been allowed to stand though still guarded, approached the central terminal again. "Actually, we've already transmitted our terms and evidence of this vulnerability to every major hegemony world. Your council is receiving the same message right now, along with the knowledge that we can trigger this effect again at any time." "You would hold our entire civilization hostage?" the Archon demanded. "No," Elena said firmly. "We're simply establishing boundaries. The terms are fair. We don't want your territory or resources. We just want to be left alone to determine our own future." The Science Director stepped forward. "Archon, I recommend accepting these terms provisionally." We need time to evaluate the full extent of the damage and protect against future vulnerabilities." For a long moment, the Archon was silent, the weight of an empire's future resting on his decision. Finally, he gave a gesture of acquiescence. "Transmit our acceptance," he ordered. Then, turning to Elena, "You've achieved a temporary advantage, Major Vasquez. But the hegemony has existed for millennia. We endure." Elena nodded. "So do we, Archon. That's the point you missed about humans. We endure. Against all odds, against any threat, we find a way to survive. Remember that before you consider coming after us again." The observation deck of the newly constructed diplomatic station Harmony offered a spectacular view of the nebula that now marked the boundary between human and hegemony space. Elena stood at the viewport, dress uniform immaculate, watching the swirling cosmic gases that glowed with ethereal blues and purples. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marcus joined her, looking more comfortable in his civilian attire than he ever had in military fatigues. "Hard to believe it's the aftermath of a supernova that destroyed an entire star system. Beauty from destruction," Elena mused. "Somehow appropriate for our first diplomatic outpost." The station represented something unprecedented, a neutral ground where humans and hegemony representatives could meet as equals. After centuries of unquestioned dominance, the hegemony was being forced to adapt to a new reality, one where a young, upstart species had carved out its independence through ingenuity rather than superior force. "Ambassador Vasquez," a voice called from behind them. "The hegemony delegation has arrived." Elena turned, still not entirely comfortable with her new title. "Thank you, Administrator. We'll join you shortly." As the Administrator departed, Elena took a deep breath. "Ready for this, Dr. Harrington?" Marcus smiled wryly. "As ready as I'll ever be to sit across from beings who wanted to enslave our species 6 months ago. They're bringing their best scientific minds, including Director Xil'Nari. She specifically requested your presence." "Scientific curiosity," Marcus said. "They still want to understand how we did it. And what should we tell them?" Marcus considered this. The technical details of the quantum virus, sure. That vulnerability has been patched anyway. But the human element, how we used their psychological blind spots against them. How we coordinated a resistance while appearing fragmented and desperate. He shook his head. "Some things should remain mysterious." Elena nodded, straightening her uniform one last time. "I still receive messages from people who were on that outpost. Maya's leading a research team now. Kai's training special forces. Everyone who survived that last stand has gone on to do remarkable things. Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying priorities," Marcus observed. "It was more than that," Elena said. "It was knowing we were part of something bigger. That even if we died, we'd have changed the course of human history." They began walking toward the conference room where representatives from both civilizations waited. "You know," Marcus said, "the hegemony's biggest mistake wasn't technological. It was assuming that because we were younger, we were somehow less. They saw our adaptability as primitive instead of recognizing it as our greatest strength." Elena smiled. "Rule number 1 when dealing with humans. Never underestimate our capacity to surprise," Marcus finished. As they entered the conference room, Archon Vexcal, now serving as the hegemony's chief diplomatic officer, rose to greet them. His posture was different now, cautious, respectful, and undeniably curious. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "we have much to discuss about our shared future." "Yes," Elena agreed, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting that the Archon had learned to reciprocate. "I believe we do." In the vastness of space beyond the station's windows, the nebula continued its slow cosmic dance, a reminder that even the most fundamental forces of the universe could be transformed with enough time and pressure. Just as a species once dismissed as primitive had transformed the balance of power among the stars.